Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey present Locked On Sports Today.
It's a good thing San Francisco retained Jimmy Garoppolo. What has happened to the defending AFC champions? And what did Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, and Lambeau Field have in common? Sunday night. I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. For those asking why the San Francisco 49ers brought back Jimmy Garoppolo when they were saying it was Trey Lance's team, the answer came in an unfortunate circumstance in week 2. Trey Lance reportedly breaks his ankle early in the game against the Seahawks. He is expected to be out, if not for the entire season, most of it. And in walks Jimmy Garoppolo, help leading the 49ers to a 27-7 win in the way that Jimmy Garoppolo leads the 49ers to these kinds of wins, right? Joining me now from Locked On 49ers, Brian Peacock. And Brian, now that we've seen this play out, how does it change the way that you view this decision to keep Jimmy G in San Fran?
Yeah, this is always the most likely scenario, I think, when Jimmy Garoppolo stayed, was that he was going to replace Trey Lance because of injury, not so much getting just replaced. And I think that's where a lot of people got it wrong, is they thought, oh, they want to bring Jimmy back because they're not sure about Trey. And at some point, Jimmy Garoppolo is going to start games because Trey gets benched. And that was never going to be the scenario. It was always going to be, oh, well, we're going to run this quarterback enough that he's going to get hit enough that we probably should have a pretty good backup quarterback. And if that can be the guy that we know we can win with, and we can get him for $6.5 million this year, then that's what we need to do. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo is going to make a lot more than $6.5 million because he can start a bunch of games and start hitting some of those escalators in his contract. But the really unfortunate part of all this is now the lack of development for Trey Lance. And it's the one thing he needed, was to play a lot more football. And now he's played a handful of games, 4+ games as a starter since 2019. It was a long time ago that he was playing games for an FCS level school at North Dakota State. So the development path for Trey Lance is really the problem now for the 49ers that they're going to have to worry about going forward. But right now it's business as usual. What we've seen from the last 5 years, the 49ers have a good roster. They can run the ball, they can play defense, and Jimmy Garoppolo can get the ball out in 2.5 seconds, and they can win football games with him.
Yeah, we've seen what this offense can be with Jimmy Garoppolo. We've seen what this team can do with Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo was top 5 in EPA per play last year, and everyone understood they have to get better at that position. That's just how this has worked. So, okay, this seems like to me a move that raises your floor as a team week to week. We know we have a better idea of what it's going to be and not be, but it also potentially lowers your ceiling. That's the idea of bringing in Trey Lance, is to raise the ceiling of this team. So ultimately, how do you think that cashes out given what we've seen so far from this team through 2 weeks?
Yeah, people want to say, well, with Jimmy, you can't win a Super Bowl because they didn't win the Super Bowl and they didn't get past the Los Angeles Rams in the NFC Championship game last year. But I think they still can win a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo.
That's getting pretty close, by the way.
They were very close to winning the Super Bowl. Some other things went haywire. It wasn't like Jimmy Garoppolo threw 5 pick sixes in the Super Bowl and suddenly they couldn't win. Jaquiski Tartt catches a Matthew Stafford pass. The 49ers are in the Super Bowl. Do they beat the Bengals potentially? Did they win a Super Bowl last year? So it's a small number of plays could have gone either way those 2 years. And maybe Jimmy does hoist a Lombardi. Maybe things look a lot different if he did win that Super Bowl in 2019. Maybe they decide not to go get another quarterback. But it's Jimmy Garoppolo can play and they can win. He doesn't raise the ceiling like you had hoped Trey Lance would have at the end of his development, whenever that happens, or someone like Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, clearly. But he's good enough to beat the Packers in the playoffs every year. So there's that.
You had to do it. You had to do it, didn't you?
I didn't mean it.
Yes, you did. Stay up to date all season on the San Francisco 49ers by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and the Locked On 49ers podcast on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. Thanks for making Locked On Sports today your first listen. Coming up, what has happened to the AFC champions? Here's what to look for on BetOnline, your number one spot for all of your gambling needs. Monday Night Football provides a few interesting lines, including Josh Allen's passing yards over under. They have it set at 263.5, but that's not even the highest passing total. BetOnline has Kirk Cousins over under at 279.5, and no surprise, the Buffalo Bills are expected to score the most points tonight. BetOnline has their team total at 29.5. BetOnline, where the game starts. Sunday was rife with improbable comebacks and immaculate upsets. The most impressive may have been the Miami Dolphins' huge comeback over the Baltimore Ravens.
The Miami Dolphins roar back for a 42-38 victory over the Baltimore Ravens in Week 2. I'm Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins. The Dolphins utilizing a 28-point flurry of points in the fourth quarter, highlighted by a career-high 469 yards passing and 6 touchdowns from quarterback Tua Tagovailoa to complete a miraculous 21-point comeback, 42-38 over the Baltimore Ravens to push the Miami Dolphins to 2-0. The team's upgraded wide receiving core, highlighted by Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, each had monster days as well, helping the Dolphins' big strike ability come in the clutch. And the Dolphins are 2-0, set to host the Buffalo Bills in Week 3.
Meanwhile, the Jacksonville Jaguars not only beat the Indianapolis Colts, they shut them out.
The Jacksonville Jaguars are victorious in their home opener versus the Indianapolis Colts with a 24-0 shutout of Matt Ryan and company. It was the textbook performance by Jacksonville, where what they did was they played a very efficient, very professional, workmanlike game. Trevor Lawrence was super in control of the offense. He had some great throws. They got out to an early lead, and then the defense went hunting, and they ended up getting 5 sacks on Matt Ryan. It's what we've talked about on Locked On Jaguars. You want to see competence. You want to see a real NFL way of winning games. And for the first time in a long time, the Jaguars got that done today. 24-0 home opener against the Colts. They're now 1-1, and they head out west next week to play the Chargers.
What is going on in Indianapolis? It is a mess. And the Broncos' home opener brought Denver a win over the Houston Texans. It was far from a good day. Fans rained boos on a largely inept offense, and Jerry Jeudy and Pat Surtain II both left the game with injuries in the first half and did not return. Can you be unhappy about a win? Well,
the Denver Broncos improved to 1-1 on the season after a 16-9 victory over the Houston Texans, but the Broncos' red zone offensive struggles continued. How do they address that? I'm Cody Rourke, host of Lockdown Broncos, and for the Broncos, they came out on top with a victory, but there's still a lot of areas they need to address this week. According to Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, they have been unable to convert it in the red zone in 2 consecutive games, not to mention penalties. 13 of them for 100 yards have impacted the Broncos' offensive rhythm, not to mention you add in the loss of Jerry Jeudy, who's dealing with rib injury right now. According to Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, his status is up in the air for this upcoming week, Sunday Night Football against the San Francisco 49ers. The Broncos have a lot of things they need to clean up. It'll be an interesting week to see how they address it in practice. Make sure you check out Lockdown Broncos, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format, not to mention available on YouTube.
The city of Las Vegas has its first professional championship thanks to the Las Vegas Aces. The Aces won the WNBA title 3-1 over the Connecticut Sun after a 78-71 clincher. Aces guard Chelsea Gray was named Finals MVP. This is the Aces' second Finals appearance in the last 3 years, but their first title. Coach Becky Hammon is the first in WNBA history to win a title in her first season as head coach. Hammon was a player for the Aces when the franchise was located in San Antonio and made the finals in 2008. She was also an assistant to Greg Popovich with the San Antonio Spurs for 8 seasons before Aces owner Mark Davis hired her last December to take over the WNBA team. And on the diamond, Aaron Judge is doing much more than just hitting home runs for the New York Yankees.
This is Stacey Gotsoulias of Locked On Yankees, and the Yankees beat the Brewers 12-8 to avoid a 3-game sweep in Milwaukee. Nice job, guys. Aaron Judge, 4 for 5 with 2 home runs. He's now up to 59. And not only that, since September 3rd, his average has gone up from 294 to 316. So it's not just home runs. He's doing it all, everyone. and he's close to overtaking the lead in the batting title, which would give him the Triple Crown. Now, there are a bunch of games left. Anything can happen, but what we're watching from Aaron Judge is amazing. So if you live in the New York area and you have the means to do so, get your bums to Yankee Stadium this next week. It's a long homestand. You might witness history. I'll have a full recap of this game on the next Locked On Yankees, and I have some thoughts about the MVP debate, because there are lots of thoughts from lots of people, and I have thoughts too, so tune in.
It wouldn't be weird for a team who lost the Super Bowl to come out with a little bit of a hangover. We've seen this in the past, but there are Super Bowl loser hangovers, and then there's going 0-2 against Mitch Trubisky and Cooper Rush. To try and help me figure out what exactly is going on in Cincinnati, Jake Lisco from Locked On Bengals joins me now. And Jake, what isn't working for this team right now that was working at the end of last season and in the playoffs when the Bengals looked so good?
I would say the offense, but the offense wasn't working at all times in that playoff run last year either. I think it comes down to some certainly offensive issues. Joe Burrow doesn't look the way that we have grown accustomed to Joe Burrow looking for far too much of these games. The offensive line still has issues. The offense doesn't seem to have made, or perhaps Joe Burrow, or perhaps you name the X factor, the adjustment needed to the preponderance of too high looks that they've started to see this year. So that big play that was so crucial for them last year has been conspicuously absent for the most part through two games for this team.
They prominently added players to their offensive line this offseason, not superstar level players, but players that most people, myself included, certainly thought would bolster this team in a way that we just haven't seen play out on the field yet. So on the spectrum of it just wasn't going to work to let's give this some patience and down the line it can be really good, where do you fall in there?
Well, I have more concerns about the offense structurally, I think, at this point than I do about the offensive line, which 13 sacks in 2 games. People are going to look at that and people are going to scream about the offensive line in the national media and in local media. And some of it will be correct and some of it probably won't be. You go back to week 1, I think Joe Burrow firmly accountable for at least 2 of those sacks he took. And that leaves 4. One of them was a kneel down at the line of scrimmage that was counted as a sack, but isn't a real sack. You know what I mean? 4 sacks, still probably too many. Against Dallas, I think that there are some coverage sack issues, which speak to the structure of the offense that I'm talking about, and also some plays where Joe Burrow just needs to get rid of the ball. And without having downfield replays for all 22, we can't say with veracity that he had opportunities to throw those balls. So maybe, again, coverage issues, but either way, not all on the offensive line, certainly somewhat on the offensive line. A lot of adjustments to make in general, I think, for this offense. And I do think that the offensive line still can play better, but some of this is just the way Joe Burrow plays football, and some of it is the offense needing to make adjustments.
So I understand that we haven't even been, 24 hours from this game on Sunday, but if you were to say and have a meeting with the coaches and say, look, these are the things that I think the team can fix. These are not even necessarily the ways to fix them, but just these are the things that I think are fixable about what we're talking about here offensively. What are those things?
Yeah, I think that there are some tendency issues, and that's what the coaching staff can look at and probably address. I was pleased against the Cowboys in week 2 when they came out and went under center, straight drop back pass. After week 1, 16 out of 18 plays under center were running plays, and all of those running plays that had pre-snap motion went in the direction of the motion. They broke both of those tendencies this week against the Cowboys in week 2. The thing that I'm more concerned about them fixing, and I do think that the coaching staff can get a handle on some of this stuff, although critics would say that they've been seeing it for years now and they haven't seen those adjustments come in a meaningful way. The item that would be more concerning to me is Joe Burrow's comfortability. He simply does not look like the same player so far, and certainly some of that on the offensive line. I don't mean to diminish the way the offensive line is played, which has been mostly poor, but Joe Burrow has also left something to be desired, I think, in terms of pocket management. He's leaving clean pockets at times, and when things break down, the tendency is to look for a scrambling lane, which has gotten him into trouble, whereas earlier in his career and when he's playing well, the tendency is to keep the eyes up and look for the play. And that occasionally does get him sacked, but the instincts have not been entirely there. And a lot of this could be to do with him missing 3 weeks of reps with that appendectomy. That was an open procedure, not the laparoscopic procedure. And maybe Burrow's just a guy that needs the reps.
Stay up to date all season on the AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. Coming up, the Packers and Bears got together for another meeting of rivals on Sunday night. Now on to Sleeper. Sleeper is the fastest growing fantasy platform today. With the NFL season kicked off, Sleeper is climbing the charts, millions of users, and they've just launched 22 new features, including a new over-under game integrated right into your fantasy interface. You already use Sleeper for your fantasy football leagues. Now you can play their great over-under game right in the same spot. Just pick, let's say, rushing yards, and you pick a couple players. Then you choose the over or the under. You choose the amount of money you want to enter in the contest. If you pick correctly, you win anywhere from 2 times to 20 times the money you put in. Those are not returns you're going to get other places. Plus, it's got a built-in chat function. I can see and copy my group's picks, or they can copy mine, more likely. So stop what you're doing and download the Sleeper app to play their new over-under game and have fun with your friends while making some money. And we have a listener group for Locked On Sports Today listeners. Join our group at sleeper.com/lockedontoday, and Sleeper will automatically match your first deposit up to $100. Again, go to sleeper.com/lockedontoday, and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It was an unusual situation for these two teams to be in. The Bears coming in undefeated, the Packers coming in at the bottom of the division. Of course, all of this after just week 1. And the Bears got off to a hot start. They get out to a 7-3 lead, and then the Packers pour on 21 second quarter points. They win 27-10. They get back on track, leaving us questions about both of these teams. Joining me now from Locked On Bears, Lauren Cox. And Lauren, when you look at this from a Bears perspective, do you feel like what we saw was more about week 1 being a little bit of a mirage for the Bears, or about the Packers getting right in this game?
I certainly think week 1 was a mirage in the sense of all of the rain and everything the Bears had to do with, environmental wise at Soldier Field. But I think this was them coming back to earth and looking a little bit more like the team that we thought they would look like. And to some extent, I think it's Green Bay looking more like the team we thought Green Bay would look like. The talent deficiency between these two teams was definitely high, and the Bears couldn't play the type of perfect level of football they would need to win a game like this. So yeah, it feels like a more of a righting of the ship for both teams on back to where we thought they would be more entering this season.
Does this, let me ask it this way. To what extent does this answer any questions you had about this Packers team after what we saw in week 1 against Minnesota in what was in a large measure a lifeless performance?
It felt like a continuation of some of that, but an improvement in some of that. That like still Rodgers and his young receivers are still getting on the same page, right? I mean, there were some missed passes there that you just don't normally expect from a Green Bay offense, but yet if you can just run the ball with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon as effectively as the Packers did, not only in week 1 against the Vikings, but also in this game against the Bears, you don't need as sharp of a Rodgers passing connection against a team as poor as the Bears, comparatively to a team like the Vikings that you're going to actually need to complete some of those throws. So I don't know if it answered all the questions about the Packers offense, because the Bears might not provide the most accurate answer on what the Packers will be facing for the rest of the season.
Yeah, 193 yards on 33 combined carries for the running backs in this game for the Packers. This is kind of the version of the team we thought we would get. Aaron Rodgers and the run game, a nasty defense, and then a shot play here. Special teams doesn't lose it for you. That's supposed to be what we thought this Packers team was going to be. On the Bears side, they're a team going and trying to build. They're trying to build what the Packers have, right? So as we move forward here, with the understanding that what happened in week 1 might have been a little less indicative of what we're going to see moving forward, how are you going to qualify success for the Chicago Bears, let's say in the short term, not even the rest of the season, just over the next, let's say, month?
Well, even the whole season has never been, but is not supposed to be about wins and losses as much this season. But you quantify success by growth, by player development, by Justin Fields taking steps forward, by in like a game like this, the running game really looking strong, the offensive line doing a lot better in the line of scrimmage and getting that ground established throughout all 4 quarters of this game, right? Like you look for progress in those small areas, and you feel like if you can stack those up, even if they don't turn into wins, that's progress. That's some level of success for a young Bears team.
As we look forward here, we have a Monday night game that also involves an NFC North opponent. I mentioned the Vikings in week 1 against the Packers. Does what we saw on Sunday change how you feel about the Vikings potentially and how you feel about how the pecking order shakes out here in the NFC North?
I think it definitely pushes them a higher, more firmly up into that like lead the division type conversation. I think entering the season, right, they felt like a very clear second. Let's see what happens under Kevin O'Connell. But if you can get Justin Jefferson going for 150 plus yards every game, it's not a bad way to do things with a good running game behind it and Dalvin Cook. And that defense, I think, playing better than people expected. Maybe some of that was the Packers still getting their things together, but I think the Vikings have a lot of confidence kind of moving forward that this plan can work, just taking the same players that were already there and using them more intelligently.
Stay up to date all season on the Chicago Bears and Green Bay Packers by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Bears, and the Locked On Packers podcast on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. And finally, here are my 3 game balls of week 2. Tua Tagovailoa throws 6 touchdown passes to power the comeback over the Ravens and silence the doubters. Aaron Jones racked up 170 yards and 2 touchdowns and just 18 total touches to power the Pack victory. And Kyler Murray single-handedly brought his team back from down 20-0 to give the Cards a chance to beat the Raiders in OT. I guess he did his homework this week. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Now go find your favorite team's Locked On podcast and make them your second listen. Coming up tomorrow, just how much better than the rest of the AFC do the Buffalo Bills look? So at least until tomorrow, stay Locked On Sports Today.
Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey present Locked On Sports Today.